7:47 p.m. One luxury car after another rolls to a stop beneath a canopy of dazzling lights, camera flashes explode across the entrance, and familiar faces from Nollywood step onto the red carpet dressed for what is already being whispered about as the most extravagant wedding night of the year. Yet behind the velvet ropes, the guests, photographers, and security guards are all waiting for one woman, Eucharia Anunobi. Before we go any further, this must be made absolutely clear. What follows is a fictional storytelling scenario, imagining what might happen if, at the age of 61, Eucharia truly found the man she chose to call her husband, Lucky Opara, and the two decided to celebrate their love with a spectacular wedding. And in this imagined story, there is another extraordinary surprise. Eucharia is expecting Lucky's child. Back inside the grand hall, thousands of flowers seem to cover every corner. Crystal chandeliers scatter warm light across endless banquet tables, and famous guests arrive one after another to congratulate the couple. Security personnel quietly hold the aisle clear while hundreds of phones point toward the stage. In this fictional world, reports are already calling it the wedding of the century, a $1 million wedding, and the night when love stole the spotlight. Then, without warning, the noise outside changes. A long black car stops at the entrance. The door opens. Eucharia appears in an elegant wedding gown, holding a bouquet in one hand while the other rests gently over her belly. For several seconds, even the imagined crowd seems frozen. The woman who has known heartbreak, painful separation, and devastating loss is no longer standing before them merely as a celebrated actress. Tonight, in this fictional scenario, she is a bride preparing to walk toward the man she believes is the right one, and a mother carrying the child she and Lucky are said to have dreamed of welcoming together. At the far end of the aisle, Lucky waits beneath the lights. He tries to smile calmly, but his eyes never leave her. According to the imagined whispers among the guests, he had been waiting for this exact moment all evening. Eucharia takes one step forward, then another. Applause rises around her, but her expression suddenly becomes quieter. Perhaps happiness feels different after loss. Perhaps trusting someone again after disappointment demands more courage than falling in love for the first time. She reaches the enormous doors of the ballroom and stops. Lucky remains visible in the distance, surrounded by flowers and light, while her hand stays protectively against her belly. And for one strangely silent second, one question hangs above this fictional $1 million celebration. How long does a woman who has survived heartbreak and loss need before she can truly believe that happiness has finally returned? The doors begin to open. The chandeliers shine beyond them, and Eucharia stands motionless on the threshold, her bouquet trembling almost imperceptibly in her hand. Before the chandeliers, the flowers, the luxury cars, and the imagined $1 million celebration, there were years when Eucharia Anunobi's life looked nothing like a wedding night. To understand why seeing her in a bridal gown at 61 would carry such emotional weight, the story has to leave the ballroom and return to a much quieter chapter of her real past. Eucharia was previously married to Charles Ekwu, a marriage that eventually ended in divorce. Over the years, she publicly spoke about the breakdown of that relationship and the difficulties she experienced within married life. Behind the image audiences knew from the screen was a woman dealing with responsibilities, disappointment, and the painful realization that a home does not always remain the safe place one once imagined it would be. But the end of a marriage was not the deepest loss she would endure. In 2017, Eucharia lost her only son, Raymond. There is no need to invent final words or manufacture another tragedy around that moment. The reality she publicly shared is already powerful enough. She had been a mother, had built a family around her child, and then had to continue living in a world where her only son was no longer beside her. Imagine the contrast, not as a claim about a specific private moment, but as an image of grief itself. A quiet room, an old photograph resting somewhere in the house, a chair that no longer has the person you expect to see sitting there. There are no camera flashes in that picture, no celebrity guests, and no applause. Only silence. Years later, that silence is what gives our fictional wedding scenario a meaning far beyond expensive decorations. Return now to 7:47 p.m. Eucharia is standing at the entrance in her magnificent gown, surrounded by lights, flowers, and people waiting to celebrate her. In this imagined story, Lucky Opara waits at the other end of the aisle, and Eucharia is carrying their child. But the true emotional question is not how much the wedding costs. It is what it would mean for a woman who has experienced a broken marriage and the unimaginable loss of her only son to choose love, family, and vulnerability once again. The music inside the hall becomes softer. Eucharia looks ahead, but for a brief second, the glittering ballroom seems almost to disappear. Somewhere behind all those lights remains the memory of quieter years, an old photograph, and that empty chair. Then she tightens her fingers around the bouquet and takes another step toward the door. The timeline now moves to 2022, when another name began appearing beside Eucharia Anunobi's, Lucky Opara, also reported as Lucky Opara. Their public connection emerged in a professional context, but photographs and reports quickly triggered speculation that something romantic might be happening between them. Yet this is precisely where fact must remain separate from storytelling. When those rumors circulated, Eucharia publicly denied that she and Lucky were romantically involved. Their appearances together were not proof of a secret relationship, and old headlines should not be transformed into evidence of a hidden love affair. That is the reality. But what if we imagine something completely different? What if, years after those rumors disappeared, Eucharia and Lucky happened to meet again? From this moment onward, we return entirely to our fictional scenario. There is no dramatic confession on the first night, no diamond ring waiting beneath a restaurant light, no promise of marriage. Instead, it begins with conversation. A few ordinary words become longer exchanges. One evening becomes another. Lucky asks questions and actually waits for the answers. Eucharia, cautious after everything she has experienced, keeps a distance that neither of them tries to force away. Then comes one unanswered message sitting on her phone longer than expected. Lucky does not pressure her. Hours later, she finally replies. Another night, a short telephone call unexpectedly stretches past midnight. Somewhere on a table, a meal slowly turns cold because neither notices how long they have been talking. In this imagined version, Lucky is not presented as a man arriving to rescue Eucharia from her past. She has already survived that past herself. What changes is something quieter. Around him, she begins wondering whether feeling safe with another person is still possible. And that question frightens her more than any extravagant wedding ever could. Love after heartbreak is not simply about finding someone new. It means allowing someone close enough to reach places once wounded by disappointment. Days become months. The unanswered messages become rarer. The late-night conversations become familiar. Then one evening, Lucky falls silent in the middle of a conversation. Eucharia notices immediately. He looks at her as though there is something he has wanted to say for weeks, but he still says nothing. She does not ask. On the table between them, 2 untouched cups have already gone cold. Her phone lights up with another notification, but she ignores it. For several seconds, neither moves. And somewhere inside that silence, Eucharia begins to understand that the question is no longer whether Lucky has feelings for her. The question is whether she is finally brave enough to let herself feel something too. In our fictional timeline, the moment Eucharia Anunobi and Lucky Opara finally allow their relationship to become visible, the quiet world they have built suddenly belongs to everyone else. Eucharia is 61, and almost immediately the imagined reactions across social media split in different directions. Some people celebrate the possibility of a woman finding companionship again after heartbreak and loss. Others question Lucky's intentions. Some return to Eucharia's previous marriage, reopening chapters she had already lived through long before this imagined romance began. These are not real quotations or verified reactions. They are part of this storytelling scenario, reflecting the kind of public scrutiny that can surround a celebrity relationship. But beneath all the noise lies a much simpler question. Does a 61-year-old woman need permission from strangers to fall in love again? For Eucharia, that question carries particular weight because she has publicly expressed openness to love and marriage if the right man comes into her life. In our imagined future, those words suddenly stop being an abstract possibility. They have a face. They have a name. Lucky. Yet Eucharia hesitates, not because she cannot recognize affection, but because beginning again means accepting risk again. One evening she looks at herself in the mirror longer than usual. The imagined headlines disappear. The comments disappear. There is only a woman asking herself silently, "At this age, do I still have the right to love?" Lucky chooses not to answer the critics. He posts no angry response and tries to convince no stranger that his feelings are genuine. Instead, in this fictional story, he begins preparing something quietly. A small box. A ring. Nothing happens beneath chandeliers or before television cameras. There are no reporters outside and no red carpet waiting at the door. One evening, Eucharia sits across from him at a simple table when Lucky reaches into his pocket and places the small box between them. He does not push it toward her. For several seconds, she does not move. Then he opens it. The ring catches a thin line of light. Eucharia stares at it, and suddenly every painful memory seems to stand between her hand and that box. A marriage that ended, years of rebuilding, the loss of Raymond, the fear of trusting happiness because happiness can disappear. Lucky remains silent. The room feels impossibly still. Eucharia looks from the ring to his face, then back to the ring. Her eyes begin to fill, but she says nothing. Slowly, almost cautiously, her hand moves across the table. Her fingers stop only centimeters from the little box, and then begin moving toward it again. Her fingers finally reach the little box. In our fictional story, Eucharia Anunobi looks at Lucky Opara, breathes deeply, and says yes. From that moment, everything accelerates. What began with quiet conversations and a ring placed on an ordinary table transforms into preparations for an extraordinary celebration. At first, the imagined wedding is kept almost completely secret. Yet small signs begin appearing everywhere. A designer works behind closed doors on an elaborate bridal gown. Security teams inspect a spectacular venue and study every entrance. A carefully guarded Nollywood guest list grows longer. Trucks filled with flowers arrive before sunrise. Technicians enter after dark, constructing a huge stage while enormous chandeliers are tested above rows of tables. No verified price exists because this remains a fictional scenario. But within our imagined media world, whispers quickly give the celebration a name. The $1 Million Wedding. Then, just as the preparations reach their most intense point, something happens that changes the meaning of the entire ceremony. In this fictional timeline only, Eucharia discovers that she is pregnant. There are no reporters in the room, no cameras, and no dramatic announcement. There is simply Eucharia staring at the result in front of her. She says nothing. Seconds pass. Lucky notices first that her hand is trembling. He moves closer, confused, until he understands what she is looking at. For a moment, neither knows what to say. The wedding, the flowers, the famous guests, and the enormous stage suddenly seem very far away. Eucharia's emotions become more complicated than simple happiness. She has already lived through the devastating loss of her only son, Raymond. And in this imagined future, the possibility of hearing a child's voice in her home again awakens something she has protected for years. Joy arrives, but fear walks beside it. What if loving this deeply means becoming vulnerable to loss again? Lucky does not make a speech. He simply reaches for her shaking hand and holds it. Eucharia closes her eyes. Somewhere outside, another truck carrying wedding flowers enters the venue. Workers continue building the stage, unaware that the biggest surprise of this fictional wedding has nothing to do with luxury. Eucharia slowly places her free hand over her belly. Lucky watches her, smiling through wet eyes. And in the silence between them, the imagined future suddenly contains a sound neither has heard yet. The distant possibility of a baby's cry filling a once quiet home. As the fictional wedding draws closer, Eucharia Anunobi begins living between two futures at once. One is waiting beneath chandeliers, flowers, and the enormous celebration being prepared for her and Lucky Opara. The other is quieter, still unseen, growing inside the imagined world of this story. Beside the magnificent wedding gown sits something almost impossibly small, a pair of baby shoes. Lucky sometimes kneels beside Eucharia and speaks softly toward her belly, saying things no one else can hear. In another room, a half-assembled crib stands against the wall, its pieces still scattered across the floor. What was once a home for two is slowly making space for a third person. Yet Eucharia cannot experience this happiness without fear. Every new hope touches an old wound. Memories of Raymond return, not because this unborn child could ever replace him, but precisely because no child can replace another. Raymond remains her son, part of a life and a love that cannot be erased by a new beginning. In this fictional scenario, Eucharia understands that welcoming another child would not close the space left by Raymond's death. Love does not work by substitution. A heart can carry grief for someone who is gone while still opening itself to someone who may be coming. That truth makes the happiness more complicated. Sometimes Eucharia smiles when Lucky talks to the baby. Sometimes she touches the tiny shoes and suddenly becomes silent. Lucky begins recognizing those moments. He does not tell her to forget the past. He does not promise that everything will always be perfect. He simply stays close enough for her to know she is not alone. Then comes the night before the wedding. The venue is almost ready. Flowers have arrived, the stage is standing, and somewhere across the city famous guests are preparing for the celebration. But Eucharia is not thinking about any of it. In our imagined story, she stands alone in a quiet room before an old photograph of Raymond. Her wedding gown hangs nearby, protected beneath its cover. One hand rests gently over her belly, while the other touches the edge of the photograph. Lucky reaches the doorway and stops. He sees her, but he does not enter. He understands that this moment belongs to a mother and the son she still carries in memory, so he remains outside, silent. Eucharia looks at Raymond's photograph for a long time. Behind her is tomorrow's wedding dress. Beneath her hand is the imagined promise of another life. And between them stands a woman learning that grief and hope do not have to defeat each other to exist in the same heart. 7:47 p.m. We are back exactly where this fictional story began. The enormous doors stand before Eucharia Anunobi, and now we understand why she has remained motionless for those few unforgettable seconds. Behind her are years of heartbreak, the end of a marriage, the devastating loss of her only son, Raymond, and the long silence that followed. Ahead of her, in this imagined future, stands Lucky Opara, a wedding hall glowing beneath crystal lights, and the possibility of beginning again at 61. Then the music starts. Hundreds of faces turn toward the entrance. In this fictional celebration, famous Nollywood guests rise from their seats, applause spreading through the hall as phones are lifted into the air. Lucky waits at the far end of the aisle. He does not move. Eucharia takes her first step, then another. She walks more slowly than anyone expected. Her wedding gown catches the light with every movement, but our imagined camera ignores the diamonds, the flowers, and the extravagant decorations. Instead, it moves toward her hand. Eucharia is gently resting it over her belly. In this storytelling scenario, she is not walking toward Lucky alone. She is carrying their unborn child with her. The applause becomes louder. Camera flashes burst from both sides of the aisle. Some guests smile, Others appear overwhelmed by the moment. Yet Eucharia keeps looking forward until she finally reaches Lucky. For several seconds, neither speaks. They simply look at each other. No long declaration is necessary. Lucky slowly extends his hand. Eucharia looks down at it, then places hers inside. The hall erupts. Phones rise higher, flashes become almost continuous, and the fictional million-dollar wedding, a night where love shines, reaches its brightest moment. But then the glamour suddenly becomes unimportant. Over Lucky's shoulder, Eucharia notices something among the hundreds of guests. One chair deliberately left as a quiet symbol of remembrance for Raymond. Her smile changes, only for a second. She looks toward that empty place, and the noise around her seems to fade. This unborn child will never replace the son she lost. This wedding cannot erase what came before. Lucky notices where she is looking but says nothing. His fingers simply close more firmly around hers. Eucharia lowers her eyes, touches her belly once more, and then looks back at him. The applause continues beneath the chandeliers, but for one brief second, the most powerful image in the entire imagined million-dollar wedding is not the bride, the ring, or the glittering hall. It is that quiet chair among hundreds of people, and Eucharia's smile slowly returning as she turns toward the man holding her hand. The applause is gone now. One by one, the guests leave the hall, their voices fading beyond the enormous doors that only hours earlier opened onto what our fictional world called the wedding of the century. The music has stopped. Staff members begin switching off the chandeliers, section by section, until the magnificent ballroom is covered in a softer darkness. White flower petals remain scattered across the floor. Eucharia Anunobi finally removes her high heels and sits quietly on a chair. Lucky Opara walks toward her carrying a glass of water. He places it on the table beside her and sits close. Neither of them needs to speak. And before this imagined night disappears completely, one fact must be stated clearly. The entire story presented here about Eucharia Anunobi marrying Lucky Opara and carrying his child is a fictional storytelling scenario. It is not confirmed information about their real lives. Eucharia previously denied romantic rumors involving Lucky when they circulated. What belongs to her real story is that she experienced the breakdown of a marriage, endured the devastating loss of her only son, Raymond, and has publicly spoken about being open to loving and marrying again if she meets the right person. This imagined wedding was never meant to turn speculation into fact. Instead, it asks a question that money, diamonds, and celebrity guests could never answer. After experiencing profound loss, if happiness truly knocked on the door at 61, would someone still have the courage to open it? We leave that question unanswered. Our imaginary camera begins moving slowly backward. Eucharia remains seated, her wedding gown spreading quietly around the chair. Lucky stands beside her. Most of the lights are now off. Workers disappear through a distant doorway, leaving behind only flowers, empty tables, and the remains of a celebration that seemed enormous only moments ago. Eucharia gently places one hand over her belly, the unborn child existing only within this fictional story. A final beam of light reaches the wall behind the couple. Two large shadows appear there, Eucharia and Lucky. Yet the position of her hand creates the emotional suggestion of a third presence, a future that has not arrived. Somewhere beyond the frame also remains the memory of Raymond, a love that no new beginning could replace. The camera retreats farther. No applause, no music, no flashing lights. On a nearby table, surrounded by fallen white petals from the imagined million-dollar wedding, sits the glass of water Lucky brought her. It is still completely full, and as the last chandelier goes dark, neither of them reaches for it.